A land bank is similar to a regular bank, except instead of deposits of money, you have deposits of land.
That was Kelley Coures, the Director of Metropolitan Development for the city. Kelley is advocating for a full-scale land banking program to tackle blight and dilapidated properties in our community.
There are investors here. They're making lots of money, and part of their strategy is to buy property, rent it, someone wrecks it, and they decide they're not going to fix it.
And that was Jay Young. Jay is an investigative editor at the Courier and Press. He's part of a multi-year initiative called Who Owns That?, a project that shines a light on owners of blighted properties in our community. Whenever you get the two in a room, you're going to get educated, schooled on blight.
Eat your heart out, Who Owns That, followers.
I'm Noah Stubbs.
And I'm Zach Evans.
And this is Canvas.
Well, we're sitting here with Kelley Coures, the Director of the Department of Metropolitan Development, and Jay Young, who is our investigative and weekend editor here at the Courier and Press. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Glad to be here.
So we're here to talk about land banking, Kelley. As I understand, the mayor will announce on Tuesday that he is going to fund a full-scale land banking program using some upfront riverboat money. Can you tell us about that program and how that money is going to be used?
I can tell you the general outline. The Evansville Brownfields Corporation has been serving as the city's quasi-land bank for about 13 years. It's been on a fairly small scale because there really is no budget that is identified for the Brownfield Corporation. The city has funded operations for the Brownfields Corporation in different amounts over the years. Really, it didn't take off until 2006 when the Weinsaffel administration decided to try and clear larger swaths of land in the Art District near Goosetown, Haney's Corner, with very robust code enforcement in the area. Brownfields was able to acquire over 200 dilapidated structures, primarily off the tax sale, no sale list each year, and with some private sales where the old city lots are only 25 feet wide. So in order to construct a new dwelling to meet current standards, you have to have a 50-foot lot. So the Brownfield Corporation would assemble building lots out of smaller 25-foot lots. So tax sale, you acquire some, and then you do private purchasing from foreclosed properties from mortgage companies or individuals, so that you can create those building lots. And within the Art District, within the Goosetown primarily neighborhood, working with a couple developers, Hope of Evansville, and then the NRP Group out of Ohio, over a period of 4 or 5 years, almost 80 new homes were constructed on those 200 lots. So that's where land banking really paid off at an early stage. Unfortunately, past DMD directors went on a buying spree and bought lots where there's no chance of development, unfortunately. So those lots have been sitting there for quite some time. But we're looking forward to a more robust land bank that's actually a land bank. The land bank legislation's moving through the House and Senate right now, Senate Bill 232, and I believe they're going to do a concurrent bill to pass land banking legislation. So with that and with additional funding from the city, I believe we'll be able to start a much more robust, widespread clearance of blight and assemblage of lots.
For those who really don't even know the term, what is a land bank?
A land bank is similar to a regular bank, except instead of deposits of money, you have deposits of land. And then the land bank seeks to repurpose, repackage, and either sell or to for-profit developers or donate to not-for-profit developers suitable land for new construction of single-family homes, apartment complexes, things like that.
And we've become all too familiar in recent years of the county taking property. How is this different than just the government taking property and not caring for it?
Well, your land bank is separate from government. In fact, Senate Bill 232 establishes a proposal where a city can pass an ordinance creating a separate, non-municipal, not-for-profit land bank, which then becomes the repository of those lots. Now, the county doesn't land bank. The county simply for years has taken properties that have not sold at tax sale and taken title to them and then selling them at auction. But then even after the auction, there's a bank of properties every year that were not sold. So in prior years, those that were not sold at the auction then simply existed until the next tax sale process. And so those continually, the term recidivism, they constantly recycle through that process. So the county has agreed. We've been meeting with the county about once a month since October, and the county, assuming that on March the 8th, the mayor announces that we'll ask council for money to form the land bank, the county will no longer have that auction. So what the county will do, properties that were not sold at the tax sale the county would simply take title to them, which expunges all the local liens. And for a fee, $400, whatever, then they will simply deed those over to the land bank. And so we'll bypass that auction process. And then the land bank can evaluate the structure, see if there are, generally speaking, when they get to that point, there really is no market for them because they're in such bad shape that they can't be rehabbed in any economical sense. So my thinking is that most of them, we're going to take the first group that we're going to take, the 14 and 15 no sales. And then the county does have a small amount of properties that they've had title to and for whatever reason haven't recycled through the tax sale process. So we'll probably take in about 200 structures. And my guess is that almost all of them will need to be demolished. And that would be that would be for 2016. That'd be the first group that we'll take.
And you're referring to the auction where the county takes the property because someone hasn't paid the taxes.
Well, someone doesn't pay the taxes, and then it's offered, the tax lien is offered for sale. And then if someone comes along and wants to acquire that property, then they make a deposit with the county for the amount of the delinquent taxes, and they end up paying interest on that amount. And then if someone comes and redeems it, then the owner gets the property back, plus that little bit of interest that the tax sale purchaser has paid. But most of the time, a lot of them are redeemed. Some aren't, but a lot of the time they're redeemed during that tax sale period. But these are the ones that no one came up and tried to acquire at the tax sale. And then the county takes title to those and auctions them off. But the county has agreed not to do that anymore.
Now, is that a good thing or is that
I think it's a real win because
Why?
it'll keep those from recycling, which perpetuates blight in our communities. And the whole thing really is not about tearing down blighted houses. I mean, that's when we did the blight report, what we were trying to show taxpayers is that leaving these blighted structures in neighborhoods costs the taxpayers incredible amounts of money. But it also, we're losing $2 million a year in property taxes that aren't being collected. And the problem is no one wants to buy those houses because you can't restore them in any economical way. You'd spend $200,000 to restore a house that's never going to be worth more than 50 or 60 anyway for where it is. So the infill rate, if I say infill rate, you know what I mean by infill housing.
Explain.
If 100 homes are built in Vanderburgh County this year, only 6 of them will be built within the city limits. The city of Evansville only has a 6% infill rate. And most of what's built within the city limits is built with subsidy that comes from my department that we get from the federal government to build houses for low and moderate income people. There's very few market rate homes that are built within the city limits, mainly because there's no space to build them and because people want, when they build a new home, they want to be out in a cornfield with a cul-de-sac and a curved street and where there are other similar homes like them. So the SEEK plan, the Sustainable Evansville Area Coalition plan that HUD funded in 2014, and the new comprehensive plan that the Area Plan Commission will adopt this year calls for a robust land banking effort to clear blighted properties to free up land so that infill rate can grow. Because in order to protect the city's tax base, we need an infill housing rate of about 25%. And we're way far off that mark right now.
So let me give you an example of something that's happening here in town right now. Happens every summer. There's a house just north of Franklin Street. There was a fire there last year. It's an investment home. It was vacant when the fire happened, and the gentleman who owns it lives on the north side. I've spoken with him. He has no insurance. It's a shell of a house now because of the fire. Is that something the land bank would target?
Absolutely.
Now, would you actually approach the owner and buy it from him, or would you wait till it goes through the process of no taxes paid? And
Well, is it tax delinquent now?
that I don't know.
You should have asked him. I'm just
Well,
kidding.
in the
I'm
example, we'll say it is. Let's say it is.
If you say that is what the bill that was passed last year, Vanderbilt County has not actually adopted the procedure yet. Senate Bill 415 that was passed in 2015 enables a hearing officer, the administrative judge that the building commission has every month for their hearing. A hearing officer, if a property is vacant and abandoned, the building commission can declare it a blighted property and keep it from going into the tax sale. Now, this person, if he's a private owner, if he's not tax delinquent, then the land bank could approach him and say, would you take $1,000 for this property? Would you, we'll take it off your hands for this amount of money. The goal would be, we're going to take those 200 from the tax sale, from the tax sale no sales that the county already has. So one of the things that we're going to do, and I've got two college students that work for me part-time, we're going to be doing a house-to-house search, basically in the Jacobsville and Howell neighborhoods to start. And where we can acquire those tax sale no sales and get those demolished, then the rest of the block, we'll look at every house on the block, do a photographic representation of each house on that block, ones that are boarded up and abandoned that are not on the tax sale. We'll try and find the owner and try to get them to sell us the property or donate it. The not-for-profit is a land bank. So in other cities that have active land banks that are 501c3s, banks, mortgage companies, property owners, in order to get a tax break, will go ahead and donate the property because they can take a credit.
Because there are a fair amount of people we've talked to that say, I just want the city to take it. Is this an example where the
Right. Someone could
quote-unquote
donate.
city would take it?
Yeah, you could donate it to the land bank and take a tax deduction for the value that where Indiana is a market value state. So when the assessor, there's an assessed value, you can count that as your market value. I'm not a tax advisor, but as I understand it, you could get a tax deduction for your donation.
Would the land bank ever run into a situation? I mean, these are usually investors. The gentleman I'm talking about, he's an investor, and he invested with no insurance. Is there any way that if the land bank is going to bear the cost of demolishing what was his building at the time of the fire, is there any way the land bank can recoup that cost from that previous owner?
Well, if we are attempting to acquire it from the owner, then I'm not sure why we would do that. The idea is to clear the problem in the neighborhood. The idea is not to make a profit, really. In some cases, we would want to try and sell the lot. If that's the only house on the block that we've already acquired, and we need that one to clear the whole block so that we can sell that block to a for-profit developer to develop new houses, then it only makes sense for us to approach that gentleman and acquire that house. Well, the Brownfield Corporation, we've done that many times where we own the one next door, and this house has caught fire. We just did this near Culver School. The fellow was fixing the house up, and it caught fire, and it was next door to one that we already owned. So we approached him and worked out a deal where we took that property off his hands for very little money. I mean, he realized it doesn't have a great value, but we were able to negotiate with him and take that house. And it's on the demolition list, and we'll have actually 2 full building lots there. So we'll be able to build 2 houses on that space.
In the situation I'm thinking of, this is a city lot in between 2 houses. What would a land bank do when you get both owners on both sides saying, I don't want it, it just means I have to cut the grass? Is there a concern of this land bank acquiring lots of that scattered all over town?
There would be that hazard where you would have one that neither owner, but if they're both homeowners, generally a homeowner that's offered additional land for their homestead will take it, and we do that too. We just had 2 neighbors that we presented lots to in December that we're very glad to get them.
How will you decide what gets torn down and what gets fixed?
Well, the building commission will look at all the ones we take in. The building commission, where one of their inspectors will evaluate each one. And like I said, my guess is that almost all of them will be torn down. If the building commission says, hey, we estimate that with $10,000 worth of work, that this house could be serviceable, Then we would approach Community One, which does rehab. They do whole house rehabs to sell to income qualified people. So we would approach Community One or offer it, at an auction with an escrow deed, where you would get the deed after the work is done and the building commission certifies the house is given a C of O, certificate of occupancy. There are many ways you can dispose of a property like that.
So would the land bank ever own a property that's occupied?
Not intentionally. I mean, you find people living in houses that are otherwise vacant all the time. It's a sad situation when you find them. But we've had that happen to us, where we've taken a house, taken the deed from the county, and our inspector goes over and finds someone living there, and sorry, you have to go, and it's illegal to live there because the utilities are shut off. So you're occupying it illegally.
Since you touched on it, Kelley, Jake, we brought you on here because you are the Who Owns That leader, investigates, blighted homes and all the issues attached to that. Can you talk about what you do in the community, how you go out? I know it's the off season, but we're getting back in the swing of things. Can you tell us what you see?
What we did years ago is we went on every city street, similar to what Kelley described they're going to be doing, took an inventory of all the vacant homes in town. And what we do is we find out who owns the home and track why it's empty and what their plan is. And often what we find is that it's an investment gone bad, and they're just they don't live anywhere near the property. They're not concerned about the property, and it just sits. And as Kelley alluded to, the study the city did, it causes a crime problem. It causes fire hazard. It can bring down one vacant house can bring down eventually the entire city block.
Well, an abandoned, a board up property will bring the neighboring property values down 10 to 20%, which also impacts the county's tax income when assessed valuation. That's why I say it's really not about tearing down blighted houses. I mean, that's the initial goal, but the ultimate goal is to rebuild the tax base and rebuild our urban population, because the city's population right now is about what it was in 1940. And we've got to change that. The county population is many times higher than it was in 1960, people that live outside the city limits. And so we've got to change that. And the way you do that is to increase your infill housing rate. And we need more workforce housing. City council approved our North Main Complete Street project, which is very exciting. But as the centerpiece to that, Echo Housing 2 days later received $815,000 in tax credits to build Echo Housing's Garfield Commons, which is the corner of Garfield and West Virginia, built on lots that Brownfield was able to clear and repurpose and give to Echo Housing to build that new project. So and the great thing, the West Virginia connector that council wisely left in the complete street will run right by Garfield Commons. So you'll have this ADA accessible multimodal transportation method for people to get to North Main to downtown.
We've talked about this before, Kelley, but North Main is plagued with blight. And
North Main itself has a few blighted structures on it. But you're talking about Jacobsville.
Well, of course. Well, Jacobsville in general, but North Main and just the arteries that right off of it. You just go off a side street, and you see boarded out homes. I mean, would it maybe have been a more prudent thing to address the blight rather than address the streetscape before?
No.
And why is that?
Because the complete street will serve as an economic development engine for that whole neighborhood. It'll bring a new focus to that commercial corridor. There are only 3 historic commercial corridors in Evansville. There's the Art District, Haney's Corner, there's North Main, and West Franklin. West Franklin has always been robust because it didn't have suburban flight. The same families that live in that area of the West Side right now lived there 50, 60, 80 years ago. They have the second largest street festival in the United States on West Franklin every year. It didn't suffer from suburban flight the way that North Main did after the city cut it off from the downtown by building the Civic Center there. So North Main, this is a great investment for North Main. It'll bring a lot of economic development to the North Main corridor. But as part of that, if we can get Barry, we had a meeting last week with executives from Barry, from Deaconess Hospital, and from Vectren. There are about 10, between Deaconess Hospital and Vectren and Barry Plastics, there are about 10,000 people every day that come to work in the Jacobsville neighborhood. Less than 2% of those people actually live anywhere near there. So what we're talking to them about are what sort of opportunities would your employees look for in order to relocate to be within 5 minutes walking distance of work. So as we can clear the blight from the, as you say, the arteries connecting to North Main, perhaps Barry, Deaconess, Vectren will participate with us in some method of incentivizing their employees to live closer to work. You know, it's a concept that was there in the last century, in the 19th century, where Briggs and the McCurdy Buggy Works and places like that would build housing around their factories. That's where a lot of those little shotgun houses that exist in the neighborhoods now came from. They were built by the factories for their employees. And those houses weren't meant to last 120 years. They weren't meant to last this long. So it's about clearing the land, it's about restoring our tax base, and it's about restoring population to the neighborhood, clearing out crime. 10% of all fires happen in vacant houses. You know that. So it's about building up the neighborhoods, it's about building up population and restoring our tax base.
Speaking of the tax base, how much will the taxpayers be expected to subsidize the land bank? Would it ever be self-sustaining?
Well, remember, the target is riverboat dollars. So I've asked the mayor for two things. You know, there was a $2 million decrease in riverboat rental from Tropicana for 5 years. There was an advance payment when Tropicana came in as the owner of the former Astar. And so that $2 million a year, we assume that the land-based casino will actually generate more income than the boat does. It's an assumption, but I think it's a really good guess.
At least in the short term, I would imagine
It would. So what I've asked the mayor is for 4 years of that income in two pieces, the lion's share for the land bank, and then an additional fund for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which has been without funds for many years. There's been no funding stream for it. So if we can use that little bit of riverboat money every year to fund the land bank, to do the clearance of blight, to tear down these structures that impede neighborhood progress, and then also to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to be able to put some money into development to incent developers to come and build houses on those lots. It's a two-pronged approach to cure that problem of loss of population and blight in the Jacobsville neighborhood.
The project we do focuses often on the owners and the owner responsibility, and we have focused mostly on residential properties. A couple times we've gotten involved in commercial properties, one of them being the warehouse on Maryland.
1007.
Yeah.
1007 West Maryland.
And the other being the flea market near Boston
1500
Field.
North Heidelberg.
See, you know all these.
They're
Now,
both gone.
in both cases, the city has sued ownership and the city has prevailed and recovered tens of thousands of dollars. This might be a land bank question, it might not.
Well, the land bank won't take commercial properties.
But most of the situations involving residential properties, the owner doesn't live anywhere near the
Correct.
property. The owner is an investor who often has never lived in the property.
That's part of the problem.
Why can't the city/land bank go after these residential investors and make them pay for the mess they're leaving behind?
Well, because you're talking about 1500 North Heidelberg is a very large piece of property. If the land bank was to try and legally pursue, or the city, you'd be talking about hundreds and hundreds of property owners. We don't have time to do that, and we don't have the money to pursue those. The important thing is to get the property.
But isn't there even a message to be sent? These are people who know how it works, and they know if I just sit and let it rot, the city will eventually take it. They all say that. That's what they tell us all the time.
But the city doesn't take it. Here's the mistaken idea that some people have is that when the city, number one, it takes forever for the city to be able to tear down one house because there's a long period of notification, hearings that you have to go through. You have to give the property owner sufficient time to make repairs. So you go through a couple of repair orders, then you get a raise order, and then the owner comes in or sends a representative to ask for more time. So you're a year and a half down the road, and that piece of property is still there crumbling in the neighborhood around it, where meth dealers and meth makers are in there, and the property owner doesn't really care about it, but they don't want to incur that demolition charge that's a debt on the property, a demolition lien. So they avoid that as long as possible while that house still stands there. So for the city, and then once the city does demolish the property, that doesn't change the ownership of the property. It doesn't do anything about developing the property later. So where we have to get past the mindset that the city tearing down property is the answer, that code enforcement is the answer, because it's not. That doesn't do anything to reclaim the property for future use. So the important thing is to get the property and get it torn down. You'd be talking about endless legal battles. For a big, former factory like 1500 North Heidelberg or the place at 1007 West Maryland, it does make sense because it takes $100,000 to tear one of those things down. The city simply doesn't have it. The building commission doesn't have that kind of money to make those things happen.
And by saying that as an investor, aren't you really telling me, don't worry about it, we're not coming after you?
Well, perhaps, but what we're going to do is try and acquire that property from you.
Think it'll work?
I think it'll work. It works in other cities. I don't see why it can't work here. Land banks across the eastern United States, because land banks only operate in cities that are as old as Evansville, where you have old neighborhoods and old houses, and you had a population loss, and you've had some economic hits. So those cities that have adopted land banks have a system in place to acquire property. So you have a recalcitrant owner but if that owner doesn't really care about the property, then he might liquidate it. He might sell it. So it's certainly worth going after. But you'd be talking about hundreds if you were going to try and legally pursue every owner of every dilapidated structure. It would cost the taxpayers an arm and a leg to sue people for those. So it's better to try and acquire the property.
It'd be like prosecuting parking tickets.
It would be, yeah, it would be.
Let me just ask you real quick, assuming this land bank is going to happen, what is the difference between a land bank that works and doesn't work?
Well, a land bank that works is able to do things out of the municipality's rules. Like I said, it takes the city a long time to tear down a house because of, Indiana's property laws are very strict about the government taking someone's property. I always say the two things that are most sacred are your guns and your property. And it takes a long time for the city to take a property from somebody. With a land bank, if you can acquire that property quickly, Brownfield, we acquired 7 Washington and had it gone in 6 weeks. So the speed with which an owner can tear down a property is much faster than the speed with which a municipality can. This is the reason that Senate Bill 232 has been entered and tried to be passed. So the Indiana Association of Economic Development, IACED, has been trying to get land bank legislation for years. And every year it's entered, and every year there's an intense lobbying against it. But I think this year, with the hardest hit fund and blight being in the news so much, people are now talking about blight in Evansville thanks to your column and thanks to the efforts that the administration's made to make it in the forefront of people's minds. Senate Bill 233 passed the House unanimously, which was a surprise, I think, to everyone in Indy. Our lobbyist up there, the chamber's lobbyist, was kind of surprised it passed unanimously. So I think even the hardest core right-wing politician sees that the conservative solution is to tear down blight to foster new development. So I think that's the reason.
Let's talk about timetable. Assuming that funding is approved, when can residents see demo sites in their neighborhoods?
Well, the first thing the mayor has to do is to go to council, because being the fiscal body, the council has to approve every cent that's spent in the city. So the mayor will announce next week what his allocations would be for that initial $12.5 million. And I'm presuming that will be funded, that Brownfield will be funded. The second piece to that is the legislation, Senate Bill 232, which, assuming a concurrent bill is passed by this legislature before it ends and then signed by the governor, would become law July 1st. So I guess we have in fact, we were meeting yesterday with the attorneys. I would say that Brownfield Corporation, as it exists right now, would probably start the process, once the county because the county won't transfer all those properties to us until we're certain that it's funded. Brownfield Board will accept those properties once we're certain of funding. So if the city and if the administration and the city council decide that Brownfield Corporation, as it exists right now, should go ahead and start that process, even before July 1, when Senate Bill 232 could become law. Senate Bill 232, I guess I should explain, enables a city, a county, a consolidated city, or a second-class city. Evansville is a second-class city. Senate Bill 232 enables a second-class city, their legislative body, to pass an ordinance creating a separate 501c3 land bank, very similar to what we have with Brownfield Corporation, except Senate Bill 232 specifies the appointments and the number of board members for that 501c3. Brownfield Corporation's board is established with fewer members than what Senate Bill 232 requires. Before 232 came on the scene, we were going to expand the existing Brownfield board by 4 members. So that would probably be put on hold until Senate Bill 232 becomes law. But if Brownfield Corporation, as it currently exists, if we take in all those properties, then we could start the process of evaluation and demolition within 30, 60 days. So, if we get fully funded in April, then we could probably start that large-scale demolition process. You have to issue bid. You have to bid it out, get your bids in, and sign a contract and get all that done. But I would say that we could get all of those properties gone by the end of 2016, which would be miracle and celebration time. Pop the champagne.
Would you consider changing the name from Evansville Brownfields to something else?
Well, we have here. Well, there's Senate Bill 232 again. If City Council, if that becomes law, if the governor signs it, becomes law July 1, City Council would pass an ordinance creating a land bank. So we would dissolve Brownfield Corporation and then start. We've been talking about. I wanted to call it the Evansville Neighborhood Development Corporation. My Brownfield coordinator, Carolyn Rusk, she wants to call it the Land Bank of Evansville, and I believe she's going to win because I think mine's too hard to say.
What's wrong with who owns that of Evansville?
I think it's copyrighted. The J. Young Land Bank. But I think we would have a different name for the different entity.
The only thing I like better than vacant houses is open government, and Evansville Brownfields is a nonprofit organization, not
Correct.
subject to typical open government rules. How much open government can we expect with the land bank?
There's a lot of controversy. We had some folks the other day that were, the Brownfield, the board has always bought and sold property at an open public meeting. Now, a 501c3 is a private organization. Even under 232, it's a private organization. What 232 requires is the same thing that we've been doing all along, that we buy and sell property in a public setting. Now, when we meet in executive session, we talk about, we're going to try and buy this property from this person, which anytime a private company is going to buy property from somebody, you want to keep that confidential because we don't want the price to go sky high. We don't want the neighbors to all know that we're trying to purchase this property for X amount of dollars. The other thing we just in private session, a lot of our properties, we were purchased with CDBG, with federal dollars, which requires us to put them in the hands of people who are low to moderate income. And when we get someone that wants to acquire one of those lots from us, for like a side yard or something like that, we have to discuss this person's income status. And that's not something that you want to discuss in a public meeting either. You don't want to discuss someone's income status in public. So there are decisions that are discussed in executive session, but it's not because we're doing secret deals. It's because there are things that are just better done in an executive session. But every time we sell or acquire property, we do it in an open public meeting.
If the city council were to give your department, the Department of Metropolitan Development, this money, we'd be able to find out where every penny went.
Absolutely.
Will we be able to find out where every penny went with the land bank?
Absolutely. One of the things we've talked about is making a quarterly report to council, detailing the properties that were acquired, every address, what was demolished, how much was spent on the demolition. That's why would we not do that?
I don't know. Why would you not do that?
You tell us, Kelley.
Really?
Why would we not do that? But when you're negotiating with somebody for a purchase price, when you're negotiating with an owner, you want to do that in private. You want to do that.
So that's what allows the land bank to function a lot faster than normal government.
Well, that's why state government recognizes that it should be separate from the municipality. It should be a 501c3. And Senate Bill 232 requires what we already do to have the actual transaction be approved by the board in public.
But that's what also allows you to hire your best friend contractor to fix them all.
Well, a land bank actually wouldn't hire a contractor to fix it. It would put it in the hands of someone who is going to hire a contractor to fix it with an escrow deed that they can't have it until the building commission gives them the C of O.
And you're saying we would be able, as the public, to follow all of that as it goes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Why would you not?
Because I'm a very pessimistic person.
Well, I'm your opposite. I'm an optimist.
You can't trust freedom when it's not in your hands.
I guess that's true. I still miss the deer head. That was very funny.
Yeah. So Jay found a deer head at a vacant house once, and
Concrete deer head. It's not real.
Yeah. It ended up in his office here at the Courier.
I think I gave it a voice, didn't I?
You also have can you talk about the other items, Jay, you found over the 2 or 3 years you've done this? Cat suits and what have yous?
There is there's a vacant house smell that doesn't come across the podcast.
That's clung to your clothes for...
That only comes out come July or August. And
No, this is actually a very realistic question. If we do get a land bank, what will become, or how will the Who Owns That project change?
we've talked a lot about that actually over the winter. And one of the things we're going to continue to do is focus in on the owners. There are investors here. They're making lots of money. And part of their strategy is to buy property, rent it, someone wrecks it, and they decide they're not going to fix it. And then they sit out and they literally say, we're going to let the county take it. We're going to let the government deal with this problem. There will be private owners who benefit from this strategy. We're going to find who they are and talk to them about it.
And probably make fun of them on video.
No making fun of people.
Right.
Well, I really think
you
should still focus on commercial properties because there are quite a few very, very bad commercial properties in the urban core of the city, and we don't have the resources to deal with it. Unfortunately, there just aren't enough. But it was a miracle that 1007 West Maryland was owned by an individual instead of an LLC. So the city was able to go after that person. And
that's what got him the job when the city took a very progressive stance on the issue instead of that.
As soon as we found out that it was an individual owner, we went right after him. The attorneys were very fast to do that.
As soon as you found out after the Courier and Press ran an article about
we credited you.
I just want to hear it on the podcast.
Yeah, we credited you with that.
After we told you it was an individual that owned it. Yeah, okay.
And 15
saving the taxpayers money left and right.
That's right.
Well, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Canvas, the Courier and Press's news podcast, is produced by Noah Stubbs and Zach Evans.
Check us out on courierpress.com, the Courier Press app, and podcast apps like iTunes, Pocket Cast, and Stitcher.